Good afternoon, everyone. This is February 18th, and this is the board meeting for the Executive Board for Executive Public Schools for February. And at this time, we will ask our Executive Director, Mr. Ted, to report attendance and guests.
Chairman Bullock.
Present.
Vice Chair Newbern. Present. Secretary Wheat is remote today. Ms. Boonkamp. Present. Ms. Alvarado. Present. Ms. Haran. Present. Ms. Hannon. Present. Mr. Griffin is also remote today.
Present.
Excellent. And Mr. Morgan.
Present.
Thank you so much.
All right, we have a quorum present, so I'll call the meeting to order. Next item is the approval of December 2024 minutes of board of directors. Hoping that all our board members have had a chance to review them, and I will entertain motion.
I'll move to approve the December board minutes.
I second that.
Move second, further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carried. Thank you. Our next section is the public comments. 3 minutes each from our visitors. And Mr. Morgan, do we have any visitors who have requested?
Give me 1 second. I do see a response, but it might be a test. Okay, no public comment signups today.
All right, thank you. We'll move to the next section, financials. For that, we will ask Mr. Griffin from XSET to share with us approval. We'll approve the December 2024 and January 2025 financials for both schools.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen all right?
Yes.
All right. So this is the January 2025 dashboard, which is a year-to-date representation of our finances. In the board folder, there's a separate December dashboard present as well, but December and January were prepared at the same time, so there really isn't any difference in the forecast between the December and the January financials. The January financials are significant because it also marks our second interim reporting period to LAUSD. So these January financials have been submitted to LAUSD in their template, and there'll be a separate action item for the board to approve that later this meeting. Looking at our enrollment information, we ended month 4 with 348 students across both campuses. We have data through month 4. However, we're beyond month 5 attendance. I wanted to point that out. And the reason why I didn't include month 5 yet is because with the closures due to the wildfires, or due to the fires, we needed to request a revised calendar from LAUSD, and I was pending the final calendar in order to prepare the calculations for month 5. So I just wanted to point that out. For this reporting period, we only have our month 4 attendance information, which is our P1 attendance information. Looking at the income statement, there really isn't a lot of notable variances, except in federal revenue. Something new is that we have more one-time federal dollars this year due to timing than originally planned for, and we didn't have it in the budget. We have about 60,000 more in ESSER 3, specifically for the EPS 1 campus. Going on to the expenses, the biggest expense that we talked about already was our realizing the Gage facility expenses. And I did want to point out that I do kind of break that out here in our key points. The total project expenses were just under 2.6 million. And if we add that back to our projected net loss of 2.3, our operating net income is really $252,000 for this school year. So I always want to make sure that we're aware of that. Independent of that Gage project, we are we would have had net income of $252,000 for this fiscal year.
6 million.
Looking at the balance sheet, we ended the month of December with 8.2 million and the month of January with $8.5 million. We're projecting year-end cash of $5.6 million as we anticipate spending down all of the one-time funding and different various funding sources that we received on the front end between now and the end of the school year. So I did want to point that out. We received a lot of ELOP funds that have carried over. We received other funding sources like Learning Recovery Block Grant, Arts and Music Block Grant. Those are funding sources that have been sitting in our cash account, and we're spending them down between now and the end of the school year. Our accounts receivable as of January was 21,000. So we brought in nearly all of our $3 million receivable at the end of last fiscal year, and we're projecting a receivable of $690,000 for year-end 24-25. The reason why it's so much smaller is because of we're not having all of those one-time funds where we were expending them in the prior school year and waiting for those dollars to arrive. I also have the individual dashboards for the schools as well as the home office. I think that it's always good to, kind of know where we're at at the individual school sites. So the individual school attendance information from our board approved budget, we were 600 enrolled at EPS 1, and our average daily attendance percentage through month 4 was just under 94%. EPS 2, we actually have more students at the end of month 4 than we board approved in our revised budget. So we had 122 students at the end of month 4. And our average daily attendance percentage, as you can see, is trending higher through month 4 than the board approved 94.4%. So our attendance, our ADA information is looking very promising at EPS 2, and it's close to budget at EPS 1. I also have the income statements, balance sheets, and check registers in this PDF. And I can answer any questions related to the financials whenever the board is ready.
Brian, the closures, are those just gonna I know that's also the calendar item, but so we're tacking those. How many days was it? It was 2 or 3 days?
Yeah,
I
luckily.
believe it was 2.
2 days?
Oh, sorry, Nicole.
That's okay. Luckily, because we already had 183 school days in our calendar, we do not have to file a J13
Oh, okay.
or make up
Okay.
those 2 days. We debated making them up, but we're required to offer 30 ELOP days, and that takes us through June 30th. So to make up the days, we would lose ELOP funding. It was counterproductive. But we will not incur any financial penalty for those 2 days of closure. So this new board calendar brings us down to 181 school days. Charters are only required. Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, Ms. Brand. It was 185 and now it's 183.
Okay.
So we are actually only required to have 175.
Yes.
So we still have 8 extra full school days plus the 30 ELOP school days for our students.
Yeah.
So we are in good standing in terms of instructional minutes.
And I believe we should be receiving those revised calendars from LAUSD any day now that reflect a 183 day calendar. And that way I can adjust the financials to include the ADA for 181 day calendar versus 183. I'm sorry, 183 versus 185.
Yeah, okay, thank you, and then I just have one more question, right? You said that we had ELOC funding in the bank, but that's not going to, that will keep rolling in over time, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's still planned for being funded in 25, 26.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hoping that it will continue to be funded beyond that, but I can't be certain.
Sure, okay, thank you, that's helpful.
Any other questions? Entertain a motion to receive the year-to-date January 2025 financials.
I'll move to receive the January 2025 financials.
A second.
Move in second. Any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carried. Thank you. Ryan, move the second interim report. What do you think? The same information, what you covered in the January report, I believe.
Correct. And I just wanted to quickly show the board how those numbers transferred into the LAUSD template that I needed to submit through the SACS system. So if you look here, just because there's so many numbers, these are the dashboards from January that we just went through. This one is the EPS 1 dashboard. And as you can see here, we have actuals through January of $39,060. And I highlighted those numbers over here. This is the LAUSD form that we submitted for the second interim. So our actuals to date, $39,059.72. They have the 2 decimal points. Our report did not. So that transferred over properly. Our forecast as of January 31st was $1,419,695. $1,419,695. And then our board approved budget, $47,366. $47,366. Then I wanted to point out, in case anyone was wondering why I didn't highlight this $8,600. This was the original preliminary budget that was submitted to LAUSD way back when, and it's data that just comes kind of pre-populated. When I'm doing the SAC software, we just re-upload the information. It doesn't appear on our dashboard because it's no longer, useful information for us. The new board approved budget is the 47,000. So that's the second interim for EPS 1. For EPS 2, same speech. I have board approved operating budget of $30,229. Board approved operating budget here of $30,229. Actuals to date, $493,064. Actuals to date, $493,064. And then our projected year to date, $926,717 loss, $926,718 because of the pennies that our report doesn't realize. Any questions on the interims? Oh, and might I add, these interims were completed last week. Their original due date was February 15th, and the district extended it to February 28th. But Xterra Public Schools did not need the extra time and submitted the interims early, which I'm sure the folks at LAUSD appreciate.
Great.
Thanks, Ryan.
You're welcome.
We'll also need to vote on these since they've been submitted, but we need to affirm that with the motion. So I entertain a motion to receive second interim report through January 2025.
I'll move to receive the second interim report
Moved and properly second, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposition? Motion carried. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Chairman Bullock, just for the record, can we get an audible aye for agenda items A and B from Secretary Lee?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. The next item is the approval of the selection for the audit firm for this school year's audit. And for that, we'll go back to Mr. Griffin.
I don't have anything to bring up in front of me, but we did seek bids for our audit work for the 24-25 school year. We received bids from CLA, the Clifton Larson and Allen, Silva and Silva, and Christie White and Associates. I don't believe we received a proposal from our current audit firm, Eide Bailly.
That is correct, Mr. Griffin. We invited them to do so and they failed to respond.
Yes, and purely from just so you all know, I have worked with Clifton Larson and Allen. They're an incredible firm. They're one of the larger firms. I've worked with Christie White and Associates. I currently work with them. I currently work with both of those firms. And Silva and Silva I have not worked with in the past. However, they do have partners that work there that were previously at our current audit firm, Eide Bailly. Looking purely at it from a financial point of view, the Clifton Larson and Allen proposal came in about $20,000 higher than Silva and Silva and Christie White and Associates. So looking purely at the financial, the financial impact, I think that we were opting between Silva and Silva and Christie White. One of the things that I personally liked about those two firms is while all of our firms have definitely demonstrated integrity, professionalism, and expertise in this field, the main difference between the two smaller firms and our current firm and Clifton Larson and Allen is that they don't have to go through as many reviews of the same information. And when I say that, I don't want you to think that it's a lesser review. It's just that it doesn't also need to go for approval at a national level. And so that additional approval at a national level is what can cause delays in submitting reports timely to the district if anything goes wrong. So that we don't have that concern at Christie White and Associates and Silva and Silva. And then looking at just those two, if I'm doing any sort of matchmaking, I would say that I think that Christie White is probably a better fit for our organization. Number one, because I do have what's the word I'm looking for? Familiarity with them, and I've worked with them in the past. I know what their service is like, and I know that if I called the partner on Thanksgiving Day during dinner, she would answer. So that's the sort of service that I know we can expect from Christie White and Associates. So that's where I think my recommendation would go. I don't know if Nicole may think differently.
Yeah, Mr. Griffin, I would just add that Christie White also laid out a very transparent and reasonable 3-year cost, not just a
Definitely.
year cost offer, like Silva and Silva did. So we have locked in pricing for the next 3 years, irrespective of whatever changes the IRS or impacts on the Department of Education or things being assigned to new departments at the federal level, changing audit codes. You know, we are living in uncharted times. And so that, not that we can't change our mind next year and go with somebody else if we want to, but the transparency of a 3-year fixed price was also just in such stark contrast to what was going on with our current audit firm where it felt like just every time we turned around, they were increasing the price more and more and more on us. So by choosing Christie White over the other bid firm or our current vendor, we're saving $20,000, right off the top that we can spend on recruiting instead, right? So we're very confident about this recommendation and look forward to your approval.
Any questions from the board? How many clients, Mr. Griffin, do you currently have, and exits have with Christie White?
I currently have 2 with Christie White. I'm not certain how many XED has. However, I can tell you how many they have. If you give me just a moment, I can look for the internal document that shows that.
Yeah, I do know there's been some departures from our current firm. Just was fishing for any data you have that have moved to Christie White.
Well, I can tell you I believe the trend for folks that have used our firm in the past has been to move to Christie White from them. Let me try to get you overall numbers.
That's interesting anecdotal data. Thank you.
So just to clarification, the proposed fees and the proposal are for this audit year is $30,570 for 25-26 32,815, and for 26-27 35,240. Those are locked in. Obviously, if they estimate the time, the budget was more, they'll certainly will communicate with us. So are you saying that our current auditors, I Bailey, their fee for the last fiscal year was around 50,000?
55.
55. Wow.
Yeah. And that is also what the other national firm bid, almost to the dollar. So it's clearly their pricing structure versus the small shop pricing structure. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm in a position to motion to approve proposal for a new audit firm for the next 3 audit cycles of Christie White.
I have the number for the internal number of clients XED has with Christie White. It's currently 19.
Okay.
19 of our clients.
That's up from when I was there, right? It wasn't-
Definitely is. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I'll move to approve, continuing to use Christie White in the next 2 years. I second that.
Moved and properly second. Any further discussion? Not all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Did we want to report, Mr. Weeks?
Yes, please.
Mr. Weeks?
It's already seconded, so do I just need to?
Just aye, sir.
Aye.
It's
Yeah.
been motion carried, and we have a new firm. Thank you, Mr. Griffin, for your due diligence. I know you worked hard.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now we'll receive fiscal updates of CONAP and the 990 return update from Mr. Griffin. This is just information. We'll go be here.
Sure. So we just wanted to let the board know that the winter CONAP was filed and submitted. It's not a report that requires approval from this board like the spring CONAP does. The spring CONAP is when the board approves applying for the funding, Title I, Title II, 3, and 4. The Winter Con-App is more of an update as to how much of the funds had been spent. So no board action is required. We just wanted to give you all the courtesy to know that it was properly filed and submitted on time.
Thank you.
And the 990 tax return, Mr. Griffin?
The 990 tax return also doesn't require board approval because it takes all of the financial data from the audit report that was already board approved. That report was prepared and submitted. However, I was told that there was a typo in one of the board members' names. And so I am reaching out to that firm to see if it's, if we can, amend that. I don't know if, I don't know. So it's nothing more than proper to do. It's not required. However, I'm still going to reach out to them and even though it's already been submitted, it's still within the submission timeline, so we can submit it again. So I think that there's no problem with updating the board member's name and resubmitting to the proper agencies. So I still have to do that. That has not yet occurred. But I did want to point that out that I'm going to be working on that, and I'll send a confirmation to Ms. Duquette once the name is corrected.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin.
Next item is the budget and staffing preview for our next school year budget. Ms. Duquette.
Chairman Bullock, members of the board, let me open by saying that this entire discussion is in hypothetical waters. And I'll explain on the outset, before I dive into the slides, as to why I'm especially rotating that. So the normal timeline for the budgeting process, both in California and at Xterra Public Schools, is here in front of you. The governor is required under state law to introduce his proposed budget to the state legislature in January of every year. And the state legislature certainly will not approve that budget until late June, if not June 30th at 10:59 p.m. Every year, right? That's standard. In this case, the governor's budget proposal was announced before the catastrophic fires that especially LA County and to some extent Ventura County and San Bernardino County have endured. It is also contextualized around the amount of federal aid and FEMA relief that we will or will not receive because of that. We did receive a proclamation from President Biden to cover 100% of the first 180 days. But there is not confirmation or understanding that President Trump will honor that commitment from President Biden. This budget proposal assumes a certain amount of Title and IDEA funding coming from the federal government, and we have slight projected numbers here, as well as a recipient of those federal dollars, as well as meal program funding, which is supported in part through Medicaid. So given the discussion, shall we say, at the federal level around both the Department of Education and Medicaid and the budget more broadly, I have never brought a more tenuous budget proposal for your consideration, than what we're sharing today.
So has there been discussion at the federal level?
There have been threats at the federal level, right? So historically, for the last 3 years here at Xterra, we have done some enrollment projections in February and March to predict and project staffing levels. If you recall, we concluded that work by February of last year. We'll be bringing those considerations to you at the March meeting, though we are not anticipating an overall reduction in force. At least, and I always want to caveat at this time because of everything that I just named. But based on projected enrollment, we're not anticipating that. And then every department head and principal also over the span of March and then into April works on our Schedule D expenses. So we will have our budget preview for you on May 20th. The governor is also required in statute to present his revised budget to the legislature in May. Will that be before or after May 20th? We never know. You will then make final budget approval at the June meeting with the asterisk that we can and will do a budget revise in September of 2025 after enrollment actuals occur and after norm day especially, which is standard. And also, since we will not have that June 30th budget approval, certainly until June 30th, coming down from the state. And I would also just remind that the United States Congress has failed to adopt a budget for this fiscal cycle at the federal level, and we've been on continuing resolutions for months. So the budget projection revenue side is certainly uncertain for factors outside of our control. And then we're also going to discuss a little bit today what is within our control, which is enrollment. So some key things that I just want to celebrate or highlight in case they hold true for the May revise. The overall budget was $322 billion with a B, and it was presented as a balanced budget for the state of California. This is especially notable because there were some deferments in the last budget cycle. We were in a revenue declining cycle last year, and there were some concerns that California would not have a balanced budget. So this proposal is a balanced budget. It does maintain $1.5 billion in the rainy day fund. And you can see here, it's arguably a wash on the level of funding for Proposition 98, which funds not only TK-12 education in California, but also university level and community college level funding as well. So basically a maintenance of the Prop 98 levels is what the governor is predicting, or at least was predicting before the fires. If you look at, again, the overall governor's figures, you'll notice that the allotment into that rainy day fund is almost half. And this is where I see the fires playing a role, because there is statutory language about maintaining a certain level of the rainy day fund, just like we have to maintain certain levels of cash on hand, as a school district. But in all, from an education perspective, it was a better than predicted budget. And as you can see here, K-12 funding is this lighter blue piece of the pie. It is 1/3 of the state's total expenses, and that's statutorily required in the state of California. So they have to determine the whole amount of the pie, and then immediately 1/3 must go to K-12 education according to statute. And then higher ed is also carved out there as well. You'll notice that the state's health programs are in red. I highlight this as another top concern because this assumes certain levels of Medicaid funding, and the majority of Xterra students receive health and medical assistance through that revenue line. And so we're closely listening to and watching for impacts or changes to Medicaid to help our families feel confident that their students, medical needs will be met. So specifically, as it relates to education, how do you unpack that blue piece of the pie? And what does that mean here at Xterra? The governor anticipated a cost of living adjustment across the entire budget of 2.43%. That is 2.4% higher than last year's COLA, basically. But there are years where the COLA is 6-8%, and we have had, as we all know, we're still coming down off of record inflation. So 2.43% is not a happy number. When we move employees on step and column, it's 2.5 to 4%, depending on where employees are falling on step and column. If you want to call that an average of around 3, we're working on that exact Schedule C calculation now, and we'll have that for you at the March meeting, but it's a wash at best, is what I'm highlighting here. This does include a continuation of the Universal TK program offering full-day transitional kindergarten to 4-year-olds. This has been an important component of Xterra's recruitment strategy. We have received a little over $100,000 to help support that TK staffing. It does not fully cover the cost of TK staffing, but it's certainly crucial, and once the students enrolled, they're more likely to stay. One notable point is that the current state transition plan for TK indicates that August of 2025 is the year that the classroom staffing ratio would go from 12-to-1 to 10-to-1. So this has staffing implications on our budget. And if it's a TK Kinder combined class, it's the total number of students in the class, not the number of TK students in the class, that impact that staffing ratio, which is how we do it now at Xterra Breed and Xterra Eastman. So I point that out because this is an example of something that could be postponed to ease the budget some. They might leave it at 12-to-1 for one more year, for example, which is where it's been. There is a new source of funding to be carved out to all of the school districts that is titled, most happily for CDOs like me, a discretionary block grant, as opposed to a categorical block grant. A discretionary block grant, which gives us some choice. We don't know yet how big our piece of that pie will be, of course. It continues funding for the literacy and math coach program, and we did receive about $900,000 for a 3-year budget line, and this has enabled us to have IAs and our instructional coach, of course. So let's hope that stays in the budget. There is a new requirement for dyslexia and literacy screeners, K2. You're approving the Xterra board policy for that today, and there will be some funding for the schools to purchase the screener itself. So that will hopefully be budget neutral. There's some additional funding being proposed to continue to support teacher pipeline, and we have successfully used the Waco intern teacher program. Charter school facilities fund is here, and as we are hopefully making moves, this was on the potential chopping block. So it is a CCSA lobbying victory that it is still in the proposed budget. And then a continuation of ELOP, universal meals, and no projected sweepbacks of the balance of the learning recovery emergency block grant, which we have been relying on heavily. So in all, not too bad, depending on how much of this, again, depending on how much of this holds, not too bad. As a reminder, this is what our pie looks like this year. 64% is for staffing. Tech and operating costs includes our Prop 39 rent, which is not subsidized or offset in any way. Our nutrition program and our after-school program are pass-through funds because they are categorical grant funded, and we have balanced budgets for both of those programs. So we are not, we do not experience encroachment there, which is important. Our camps have been successful, and then the other large piece of the pie continues to be, and will continue to be over the next couple of years as we continue to right size our special education program for students, additional overhead costs for special education program. So perhaps most importantly though, because we are funded based on enrollment levels, we have for you a very early and rudimentary projection of enrollment, and we've had 3 or 4 new students enroll in the last week. So we'll continue to see a little uptick here, we hope, And none of them are 8th graders or 5th graders. So those are my favorite new students to receive, right? Our non-5th and non-8th grade students. But we are playing around with essentially an enrollment projection that would be neutral, not growing necessarily. And one of the reasons we're highlighting here the need for making some funds available for recruitment efforts is we need to fill a lot of seats in kindergarten to have a neutral enrollment projection. On paper here, we're looking at around a -8 student impact. This was performed about 3 weeks ago, and we've had some significant activity, in the last 3 weeks. So we'll bring you this every month, certainly over the next 4 months as we continue to be laser focused. We also are waiting to hear back from our Prop 39 families that indicated interest last summer or last fall. And we have a special enrollment session for them coming up in March on a Saturday, kind of a new family orientation. It would be a first time for us since COVID to do something like that. So we'll be eager to report back on that as well. I do want to highlight this does continue an anticipated trend of losing EPS2 4th and 5th graders, either to KIPP and or Ellen Ochoa. And we've taken concerted steps this year to reverse that trend, including bringing our EPS2 5th graders over to middle school events like Career Day or Field Day and other opportunities like that. We are also surveying our 5th grade EPS2 families about a possible shuttle. Because we're already picking up students from our Lorena neighborhood and bringing them over to Eastman, and elementary starts earlier in the day than middle school does. If Eastman families needed it and were willing and interested, that same bus can then just,
Detour to,
load
yeah.
some more students and drop at the middle school, at least especially in the morning, which is more impactful for our families than in the afternoon. So we're surveying all families and staff now on intent to return and transportation needs for next year, and we'll have a more full report on that in March. But I do want to highlight, just again, staying laser focused on the impact of one-time funds and the impact of enrollment. Even if we only lose 8 students, with the impact of COLA and the loss of those students, that could be a 4 or 5% reduction in revenue. It also has implications as we are listening to the LAUSD School Board Charter Renewal meetings. Enrollment is having an impact on charter renewal viability. It's having an impact on the budget. It's also, absolutely an impact on our ability to secure a private site. So today we're asking, for support on consent to put some almost kind of emergency funding into the recruitment and marketing plan, and we'll be bringing back to the board in March. Proposal Advisory Team 3 has been working on this, and certainly teaching is our very first job, and nothing is more important every day than teaching our students and keeping them safe. But right behind that, if not a tie, is making sure that we stay solvent with solid recruitment plan. So we'll come back to you in March more fully, and we thank you for your support of these needs both today and through the next 3 months as we look to fill middle school and fill kindergarten. But most notably, something is upticking in the community over the last few weeks. We are picking up 2nd graders and 7th graders and grade level children that you do not normally acquire, right? Like there are natural entry points into a school. So we can all just use whatever methods of who we want to speak to incur favor. But we want this trend to continue. And I think it speaks to the tremendous work that both this leadership team and our school principals have done over the last year to improve the quality of education in Xterra. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Regarding the transportation that might happen for Eastman to Second Street,
Correct.
is Xterra already starting to pass out flyers? I know, because I even myself as a parent did the summary,
Yeah,
the
we sent
survey.
them home
Yes.
to every EPS 2 fifth grader last week.
Kind of like doing it maybe like every other week, just to get in the parents' head, hey, just remember, we're gonna have transportation, kind of like, so the parents could be
Yeah.
encouraged, because I was shocked, but usually you start getting flyers between like spring break, where other schools start announcing their enrollment, while they're already passing them, because I live in the middle of 4 charter schools,
Right.
and I already got on the mailbox, every charter school flyer of enrollment. I think Xterra should start doing that as well, and emphasize, like, highlight, we're offering transportation from elementary to middle school, push it, so the parents can get in their heads, hey, you know what? Let's not take them out, they're offering transportation, keep them where they're at, so forth, because if they're doing this now, that's showing me that the other charter schools are kind of having problems also with enrollment. So it's like a competition right now, so I think we should be looking into that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's a great idea.
Thank you.
Yes, that's a brilliant idea, Diane, because these are some of the conversations we're having in our advisory group on recruitment and community engagement, so that we can bring that back to our advisory group. I had a comment and I just lost it. I just lost it. Oh, here it is. So regarding the non-traditional grades that are coming to us, do we know what that trend is? What's sparking those enrollments?
Yeah, it's a great question, and they're literally just enrolled, are enrolling, so that's data that the office clerks are gathering for both Ms. Valle and Ms. Martinez, so we can bring that back to advisory team 3. It's just started, like I said, in the last couple of weeks, but I think it's like 5 or 6 students in the last couple of weeks that have somewhat randomly enrolled, which is the best problem to have, right? So, so that's great news.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you for that.
Thank you.
This is sort of in the weeds down rabbit hole question.
Sure.
Has there been any discussions with CCSA or SPED funding, since most of it comes from the Department of Education?
I have not heard from CCSA specifically. Myrna just discussed, more broadly on her monthly call last Friday, because it's all so hypothetical, but that funding mostly comes out of statutory language from court rulings and or from IDEA of 1974.
I understand that.
So-
I understand that. But-
So yes, so as I try to at least understand the concerns and what is being discussed on the right, shall we say, as a general blanket statement, it is that the funding would continue, it's just that the Department of Education does not need to exist to pass out that money, that money could be overseen by OMB or by a different department. So it has not been discussed that title funding would be cut or that IDEA funding would be cut, it's just that it would be passed out, so to speak, by a different entity, right? Similarly, the initial floating about making possible cuts to Medicaid didn't get very far in the floating idea stratosphere before that got pulled back. So I continue to do my very best to listen to those voices, to understand, and then hopefully work around or overcome, however difficult it is to listen to those voices. But to be clear, there are no plans at this time. An idea of a plan, I think, is the president's phrase.
And probably one of the biggest risks is delay, like,
Sure,
that's another concern,
Right.
right? Like, even if it
Right.
doesn't go away.
the payment schedule could be impacted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Which is the case right now with a
sure,
lot of organizations, one of them,
Yes.
organization I work with.
Right.
that there has been a delay.
right,
So I raised that as a precaution.
Yeah.
absolutely.
I don't know if we all understand the house on fire situation that we're in now.
Sure are.
And I guess a lot of us have just been, okay, oh, it is what it is, but I've been in too many meetings here in the last week to know differently. So that's why I'm sort of raising
Yes.
that flag because of SPED being so important.
Yeah.
I know you're on top. I just want to raise it for everyone.
Yeah.
I took a mental health break yesterday, to be fair. I do my best.
Well, Nicole, is there, for us too, for our own being on top of it as well, and not completely depend on you, is there a place where we can look at the policy things and issues that directly impact the work that we're doing? Because in my other work, we have, groups or webinars or meetings where we talk about these policy impacts.
Yeah.
And the funding is a huge piece of that, whether it's delayed or no access to or completely removed. I think it behooves us as a board to also do our work, so then
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
help and support you as well.
Okay, thank you. I will, as a school district, we are members of CASBO, California Association of School Business Officers. It is not charter specific, but because it serves all public and charter schools in California, I actually think they're frequently quicker to analyze some things than CCSA can be, just by sheer size, right? They have more analyzers to jump on. So I can share that listserv, to sign up and get those emails. That is where, the majority of the budget presentation information I shared with you today came from. The second group that I closely follow, but I believe we only have a membership, is the Association of California School Administrators, which is AXA. But I can send you CASBO and the CCSA listserv to get the updates from up north, so to speak. I know our LA group for advocacy has been especially impacted by supporting the schools who burned down. And they've kind of sent out we're drowning, not rightfully drowning, communication. So I think relying on CCSA Sacramento and CASBO would be our two best channels over the next few months. I would not suggest for anybody's mental health that they follow Truth Social, but as you know from your nonprofit work, that is often where the idea of a plan begins. And then the agencies have to scramble and react in the night based on whatever is tweeted.
Right.
So
Thank you, appreciate that.
same boat here.
Yeah. And also it allows us to do some advocacy, if you will.
Absolutely.
When we have access to this information, and so we can bring in our other networks to really support, these really important streams of funding and policy that just really supports our students.
Yeah.
And our communities.
Since you've made the statement of advocacy, I will just quickly take a point of privilege, and I won't belabor this because I know we have a presenter at 1 o'clock, but the deafening silence in response over the last 30 days is, to this retired social studies teacher, perhaps the most upsetting piece of this puzzle, when it is rank and file lawyers and agency workers who are resigning in protest, and that is the only act of heroism that we are seeing from our community more broadly. this social studies teacher's heart is breaking. The lack of people being mad as hell is shocking. And if the Sunday shows this week talk about anything, it was exactly this, lack of response. Now, that being said, our middle schoolers are planning a walkout with their teachers and you know, with permission slips and everything, you know, but there are some grassroots examples of mad as hell, and there were a lot of protests over the weekend, including in Sacramento. But the deafening silence from the right and the left in Congress, and from more of our national governors or mayors, is concerning.
Yes.
And if that is the reality, that means we all have to become those heroes and make good trouble.
Yes.
You know, so be it.
Yes.
So be it, John Lewis. But where's John Lewis for today? You know, it's a scary time. So thank you for letting me process that.
Of course. Well, I think too.
You've been ordained.
Well, I think too, if I may add to that, Nicole, is our representatives have constituents, and we are the constituents. We live in their districts.
That's right.
And we voted or not, whatever it may be, but we are constituents in their districts, and we continue to have a voice. And I think that's something we all need to remember, is we can vote people in, we can vote people out.
That's
So
right.
power to the people is truly what we need to bring into our grassroots work. And I think too, people are thinking of their safety.
Yes.
People are afraid, and we have to acknowledge that and call it. So how do we do it in a way that meets everybody's levels and meet people where they're at, that can still exercise their power as a voter, you know, as a constituent? So I think that's a reminder that we all have power. It may seem like we don't, but we do.
Absolutely. Well said, Ms. Baker. Thank you.
We'll move to our governance section with the presentation of the mid-year LCAP review.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the board. So I'm here to talk today about the mid-year LCAP. California Education Code requires local education agencies to present a report on the annual update to the LCAP and the budget overview for parents on or before February 28th of each year at a regularly scheduled governing board of the LEA. So this is the mid-year LCAP for this school year. We have to include all mid-year outcome data related to metrics identified, as well as current expenditures and implementation data. And the purpose of the mid-year LCAP is to provide the public with an update on the implementation of the current LCAP and to allow the LEA to be aware of and plan for any changes that may need to be based on the estimates of revenue, budgeted expenditures, and or student performance. So within the board packet is the PDF version of this, but it is a Google Sheets live document that was put into the PDF. So it's broken down by tab for each school site. There's goal 1, goal 2, goal 3. And then there's the budget update for parents. And then lastly, there's the metrics. So the goal itself is broken down in terms of actions, how it's being implemented, any changes in implementation, as well as successes and challenges over the past year. And then the metrics are on the last tab that I just wanted to highlight. One thing that's interesting to note is our LCAP is approved, and because a lot of the data is not released for that school year until the following school year, a lot of our metrics in our LCAP are actually from last school year, even though the actions we're doing towards those goals are current. So there is a little bit of a parallel trajectory happening, if you will. And so it's really important to take that into consideration, that some of our actions that we have in place will not actually shift the metrics, and the metrics already happened, but they will shift future metrics. So this information is all here. This is EPS 1s, and then EPS 2 is right here. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Ms. Frank. I would just say, in addition, that where there are a couple of adjustments around funding, it's because of a mid-year vacancy or, you know, somebody went on leave, and when they're tied to a federal funding strand, you know, that is partially what the mid-year LCAP is trying to capture. But we are pleased that all of our intended plans from when we wrote the LCAP back in April, May, and June, you know, of the last calendar year are being deployed at our school sites. And we've already started working on the new LCAP to bring for your approval, preview in May and approval in June. But this is specifically tied to the federal strands for compliance. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And the next item is approval of the consent agenda. Now there's 6 items. If any board member wants to take one of those items out to cover, please say so now. Otherwise, we'll vote on all 6 items in the consent agenda. That's what the definition is, consent agenda. So I will entertain a motion if there are no requests to discuss any particular item. I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second that.
Moving second, any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Next item is our annual Brown Act training with the representative from YMCA.
Thank you so much. Members of the board, congratulations to board member Alvarado for completing her training.
Congrats.
I have her certificate to prove that
You
she
don't
is
have mine?
dismissed.
I want
I want to go home.
So we are pleased to have Janelle with us today. I want to highlight 2 things as she gets ready to share screen and you guys transition to your laptops to more fully interact and ask questions. We're going to transition so that each board member is logged into the Zoom so that they can freely ask you questions, Janelle, without moving mics around in our board space. So while they do that, I will just highlight, celebrate, and remind everybody that this is the annual Brown Act training and the additional requirement, the new state requirement of ethics training. And so we will endeavor to be done in 2 hours or maybe a little less, you know, certainly depending on how many questions you guys have. Your Zoom link is in your Xterra email. I can also, let me also put it in chat if that's helpful. And we'll let Janelle get set up to share, and IT can transition our cameras, and we'll dig in for this professional development.
All right.
Anybody need it in chat?
Thanks for that setup. I'll just hang tight until you guys are ready.
Yeah, give us 1 second. Thank you so much.
Enjoy.
Diane, you're so perfect.
I know Jessica.
Janelle, just maybe 90 more seconds. Okay, Janelle, thank you so much. Go ahead.
First, I'll unmute. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for having me. Strap in. We're here for a couple of hours. I hope that my voice holds and all that. Looking forward to spending a little bit of time with you. My name is Janelle Rulli. I'm one of the partners with the law offices of Young Mini and Core. And I personally have been with Xterra from its very beginnings. In fact, I have, not in my arm reach, but I have a baseball hat from the founders to prove that. So I'm glad to be here with you all again today. What we're doing is this new legal requirement. I can't really see anybody but Brenna, but anyway, I hope that I'm not giving you more information than you need. Sorry, that wasn't a request for you to like turn on your cameras. I just, I can't read you to see like whether you're getting what I'm putting down. Okay. Anyway, what we're doing today is the new requirement of a 2-hour ethics training course. The requirement is that the requirement is individualized to board members. It's not the board as a whole. So every single one of you has to go through 2 hours by January 1 of 26. So we're pretty early on the curve, which is great. Thumbs up for that. We have to have 2 hours of this ethics training by January 1 of 26, and then 2 hours every 2 years thereafter. So we're going to rip off the Band-Aid today, get all or most of this done, and then you don't have to see us for another couple of years. So I'm just going to keep going. I will trust you to ask questions along the way. I'll give you a roadmap because 2 hours sounds interminable, but hopefully the roadmap will help you kind of continue on. The law in this area and in a lot of the areas that impact charter schools is constantly changing. And so these slides are current as of today, February 18th, 2025. Things may change. If they do, we will advise you. I'm happy to take questions along the way. This says after the training, there'll be a Q&A, but I'm happy to take questions along the way. Our firm mission, Young Mini and Core, we champion outstanding choices in education for all students. That's why we all get out of bed every day. That's why we do what we do. We also believe that quality public education is a civil right, and we work and fight alongside you to ensure that student needs are always put first. So not a lot of fight for today, but we'll save it in case we need it. That's me, still kind of look the same. All right. So I keep calling this an ethics training. And the reason I'm calling it that is because that's what the law calls it. So I am obliged to talk to you a little bit about ethics and what is ethics. So I'll kind of start with that. I talked about this a little bit at the top. Again, before January 1, 2026, every board member has to receive this ethics training in specified topics, and then at least every 2 years thereafter. We have designed these slides, this course, we're calling it a course, to meet exactly what is required by law. Therefore, sitting through this we'll send you a certificate, and then you'll be able to check that off and kind of be done. So the requirements include 2 hours of course content. Yes, we've got that. Coverage of general ethics principles and ethics laws. Yes, that's one of the first things that I'll talk about. We have to make sure that the content is relevant to the official's public service, here your board membership. So yes, it is relevant. We went through, I think it's the Fair Political Practices Commission and the Secretary of State that put out some information around this. And so we went through all of their suggested possible topics and then handpicked the ones that would apply to a charter school board situation. The course covers core content that's outlined in the ethics laws, as well as the ethics training requirements. So yes, we've done that. The course is developed, I just said this, in consultation with the FPPC and the Attorney General. And the Attorney General says that for in-person training, the ethics law portion of any course should be delivered by an attorney licensed to practice law in California, knowledgeable about California's ethics laws. That's me. I understand we're not in person, but we are live. But I am a California lawyer, and I am knowledgeable about California's ethics laws. And then last, the participant is provided proof of participation upon completion. So again, yes, we will do that. Just so you know, other courses or webinars or presentations that cover these similar types of topics, you may or may not be able to cobble those together in order to meet the ethics requirement. You can only do so if they explicitly state that the course meets the requirements of either AB 2158, or sometimes you'll see AB 1234. Kind of depends on the source of the material. In any case, you might be able to cobble those together and call it a training if each of them was given having met these requirements. So we're making sure that ours does. All right, so with all of that kind of warm up, we'll start in first on what is ethics. So big picture, we're not talking about like a college 101 level ethics course. AB 2158 ethics do not cover philosophical or moral dilemmas. That's not what we're doing. You see here an illustration of the trolley problem. If you did take an ethics class in college, you probably talked about the trolley problem. The idea is that there's a trolley that's on its path, and if it stays on its path, it would run over 5 people who are tied to the rails. A bystander has an opportunity to change the direction of the trolley and only hit 1 person. So then the ethical dilemma is, does the bystander change the direction of the trolley or just let it go? And we could spend a long time talking about our personal opinions on that. That's not what we're here for. Instead, ethics here is about what you can do as a board member to secure public trust through compliance with California law. So the things that you can do to emphasize and solidify for people that what we're doing complies with law, is moral, is ethical, and is best for students. So that's kind of our lens here. I heard a little bit of the discussion about, are we the ones we're waiting for? And I think these are really complicated times. Your board service, though, I think there are really easy ways that you can communicate to the public that you personally and the board as a whole are acting ethically. Ethics violations, ultimately, the impact of an ethics violation is to violate the public trust. It makes the public more skeptical of government. It makes the public more cynical about government. And it really just sort of shakes the public trust. We all pay our taxes. And our taxes are collected and then redistributed in ways large and small. Obviously, Xterra runs on public taxpayer dollars. You're in charge of spending those taxpayer dollars. That's why we're here. That's why you have to listen to me. There are a lot of violations out there, though, that really do kind of shake the public trust. These are some examples of headlines. A school district board member who was embezzling funds, theft of public funds, a board chair profiting by providing therapy sessions. So somebody who's on the board and is also providing a fee for service at the school or a school. Of course, it's you may have noticed that a lot of these headlines are about school districts, not necessarily charter schools. We, of course, have our own black eyes and have had our own black eyes through the years, but there are plenty of examples of ethical violations in school districts. One board member awarding her son or having the board award her son a $655,000 contract. An LA Unified board member under investigation for possibly misreporting personal finances. These things are, again, they're just kind of out there in the ether. We, again, obviously want to avoid these lapses. So ethics really we see as about promoting public trust in government. Again, I recognize these are very complicated times. There's a lot of mistrust of government coming from the government. Again, I think for purposes of this training and for purposes of your role as an Xterra board member, I would encourage you to focus on your role as an Xterra board member. There's a lot that we can do personally, possibly even professionally. But for now, for this training, let's just kind of keep it in our Xterra bubble for now. So the ways that you promote public trust in government, and I guess I should make this plain, you are government. You are receiving public dollars and you're spending public dollars. You are government. So we promote trust by being trustworthy, by being fair, acting with fairness, by avoiding the appearance of impropriety, meaning, not doing something that might be technically legal, but doesn't look good and would raise eyebrows, and just trying to avoid those things. We do this by acting responsibly and acting respectfully as well to the public. This umbrella term of ethics leads into kind of the rest of the training here. So our core relevant topics under AB 2158 are around transparency. So we'll talk about the Brown Act first. Fair processes, use of public funds, bribery and gifts, and personal financial gain. So we'll kind of cover all of those topics. There's an organization called the Institute for Local Government, which really does exist. And they have a lot of publications around, good government and good governance at the local level. And so they kind of have a lot to say about what is ethics and how public board members should be acting. So just as kind of like setting the stage, they say in California, state and federal laws create a complex set of requirements and laws that guide elected officials and agency staff in their service to their communities. So some of these laws do apply to charter school board members. As extensive and complex as they are, it's important, of course, to remember that ethics laws only constitute minimum standards for officials' conduct. This is a floor and not a ceiling. Just because I said this, just because something is legal doesn't mean it's also ethical. And then public service really is just that. It's about service. There's a variety of laws that are designed to prevent public servants from using their office for personal financial gain. So, certainly it's happened. Obviously, we showed you all those headlines. Things have happened in the past. We try to mitigate them. California passes new laws all the time. We just have to take care to follow them. Just a reminder about kind of what it means to be operating in a democracy. The virtue of a democracy is that leaders understand that those they govern, leaders understand those that they govern, because leaders do not have special privileges. You know, you all still go to the grocery store and pick up your kids from school and, you know, pay your taxes. Like you do all the things that a normal citizen does. So a number of laws limit the perks that can be enjoyed by public servants. We'll talk about those. They restrict the income that they can make, what uses can be made of public resources, and the receipt of gifts and other gestures. So those things are in place, and a lot of them do apply to you as well. A number of laws enable the public and the media to obtain information about public official activities and the decision-making process. That's the transparency piece that we're talking about. And then last here, just a reminder that local officials are also stewards of the decision-making process. You know, you are making decisions on behalf of hundreds of students, and the result of your decisions impact them. On the gloom and doom side of things, ethical lapses could lead to denial of a charter renewal petition. First of all, I don't say this lightly. Most of the work that I do in our firm is getting charters renewed. We're still in it. You know, we had a busy fall and we're still in it. So I just want to be clear that I don't say this stuff lightly, but there is a new finding out there. In order for it, like if a district wants to deny a middle performing school or even a high performing school, there's a procedure for the district to make an argument that the charter school is demonstrably unlikely to successfully implement the program set forth in the petition due to substantial fiscal or governance factors. These terms are not defined, just to be clear. What is substantial, what is fiscal, what's a factor, you know, these things are not defined in law. But there are some districts out there that are starting to use this procedure, and it's sort of a cure and correct. So we submit the charter, they send us a notice, hey, we think that you've engaged in substantial fiscal or governance factors. We respond and say, oh, no, things are totally clean here, don't worry about it. And they say, okay, yeah, you're right. Or they say, no, there really are problems. And they could non-renew the charter based on that. Similarly, a charter could be revoked. There are 4 reasons for charter revocation. These are 3 of them, where we commit a material violation of any of the conditions, standards, or procedures set forth in the charter, or we fail to meet generally accepted accounting principles or engage in fiscal mismanagement, or if we violated any law. Those things would expose us to the potential for charter revocation. I don't have any reason to believe that any of these would be live issues for Xterra, but I do just need to kind of let you know that it's out there. And then last, ethical lapses could lead to serious consequences for you, for the individual. Could be removal as a board member, possible loss of employment. There could be criminal investigations, prosecution, jail time, financial penalties. These are obviously for big deal violations, and legal violations at that. There could be administrative investigations and financial penalties. There could be civil litigation. And then, of course, there could be reputational harm within the community. So we want to act ethically. And just as a little bit of a palate cleanser, a couple of memes for you. All right, so we're getting on our roadmap here. Oh, do you guys have a
Janelle,
question?
I was just gonna say, I appreciated the levity.
Yeah, I know. These topics get very heavy very quickly.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, so our roadmap for today. We'll talk about the transparency topics first. That's the Brown Act and the Public Records Act. We'll next talk about personal financial gain. And sorry, just to be clear, our 2 hours started in my mind 30 minutes ago. So I'm not like starting the 2 hours right now with all that throat clearing. We're already on the clock. After transparency, we'll talk about personal financial gain. So that's conflict of interest and some reporting obligations. We'll talk about bribery and gifts, a little bit about the use of public funds, and a little bit about fair process. So this is what we're here for. All right, so kicking off with the Brown Act. I know this is not your first Brown Act training. I also have some specific feedback for Xterra based on a couple of things that I saw. So hopefully you'll be open to that. We do the Brown Act training, or the Brown Act portion of this under the kind of guideposts of 6 different questions to lead us along the way. Our first question is, what's the purpose of the Brown Act? Why do we care about it? What does it mean? Our second question is, what's a meeting? This is where we'll spend most of the time. We have to know whether we're having a meeting under the Brown Act to know whether it applies. If we don't meet the legal definition of a board meeting, we don't have to worry about the Brown Act. Third, what are the notice and agenda requirements once we do know that we're having a meeting? Fourth, what are the public's rights under the Brown Act? Of course, the answer is many. That's the whole point. Fifth, what are the permissible closed session topics under the Brown Act? And then last, what are the penalties and remedies for violating the Brown Act? I just gave you a little bit of some hard hitting, penalties and remedies there. I'm not going to overplay this one, I promise, in the Brown Act. So the Brown Act, as you hopefully know, was not named for Jerry Brown, Governor Jerry Brown, nor was it named for his father. It was named for a legislator in the 1950s, Ralph Brown. So the Brown Act has been on the books in California since 1953. That's well before charter schools existed, well before COVID existed, well before, I guess, the internet existed, or at least anyway, the internet in its current form. This has been on the books for a very long time. The Brown Act, for many, many years, steadfastly did not change with new technology. It has changed a little bit, and we'll talk about that. But for the most part, the Brown Act is about holding meetings in person where we're all together and the door is open, unlocked, and people can come in and participate in our meetings. That's the idea behind it. The legislative intent for the Brown Act is on this slide. I'll just emphasize the last sentence. The people insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments they have created. I lectured earlier about how you are government. And again, this is just another way of kind of hammering that home. You're making decisions, you're spending public dollars, and the people, by enacting this legislation, insist on remaining informed in what it is that you're doing, how you're spending that money, so that they can retain control over you. You're the instrument of governmentality. A reminder too that the Brown Act does now, as of 2020, does now explicitly apply to charter schools. There was a long time we would do a song and dance about, like, does it apply, doesn't it apply? Well, we voluntarily said we would, or LA Unified said we would follow it. It now does apply by law. So there's just no song and dance to do anymore about that. How does the Brown Act accomplish its purpose, of kind of letting the sunshine in? Well, first, we're giving the public notice of our meetings. We have to post agendas according to specific legal requirements, and the agenda has to contain a description of what it is that we're going to be talking about. Our meetings have to be open to the public, so confidentiality is limited. The decisions that you make and the way that you wrestle with information happens out in the open and in public, and only in a very few circumstances can we go behind closed doors. A reminder that transparency does not mean chaos. So meetings are held in public, they're not controlled by the public. So you do have to open the doors, but just a reminder that this is your meeting. You get to say how long people can speak on topics, you get to set the agenda, you get to set the time and place. This is your meeting and you do control it. All right, so our basic definition of a meeting under the Brown Act is when any congregation of a majority of the members of the board meet to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of school business. So a congregation of a majority of the members of the board meet to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action. I counted 5 board members. Is that still right? gonna-
For today here, Janelle, because one of them completed it at CCSA boot camp with you guys.
Okay, but Xterra does have 5 board members.
Yes.
Okay, great, perfect, thank you. So a majority of 5 is 3. So anytime 3 of you are hearing, discussing, deliberating, or taking action on any item of school business, we've met the definition of a meeting. Anytime there are 3 of you involved. Of course, as soon as I give you the definition of a meeting, I'll tell you about some of the exceptions. When I say exceptions, what I mean is these are circumstances where board members can get together, including a majority of board members can get together without setting an agenda, without having a public space, you know, without meeting the other formal requirements of the Brown Act. So you can do that in these 3 circumstances. Attendance of a majority of you at a public conference of general interest. You know, Nicole just mentioned the CCSA, that was their boot camp. They also hold an annual conference. So a majority of the board could go to the CCSA conference. You could talk about what you learned. You could have lunch together. You could talk about the Dodgers, but you cannot talk about school business. So that last, the bottom part there with the all caps, in all these circumstances, you can't talk about school business. Similarly, attendance of a majority of you at another body's public meeting. When the charter is up for renewal, the charters are up for renewal. You could go to the LA Unified board meeting and sit together and you can talk about the renewal, but you can't also talk about the budget or the facility or something that's not on LA Unified's agenda. And then last, attendance of a majority of you at a purely social or ceremonial gathering. So if you wanted to get together to have coffee on a Saturday morning and kind of get to know each other in a less formal way, you could do that as long as you're not talking about school business. You also could go to a graduation ceremony or a back to school night or you know, some arts event at the school. You can do that. Again, you just can't talk about school business when you're there. All right. See, sorry. There we go. I'm guessing with 5 board members, you probably don't rely on committees a lot. However, if you do, the general, sorry, when I say committee, I mean a board committee, not a school level committee, a board committee. When we're talking about board committees, the general take-home rule is that all board committees do have to follow the Brown Act in just the same way it applies to the board, the full board. That means committees would have to set an agenda, they'd have to post their agenda, they would have to meet in person, they'd have to allow public comment, all of that. So in just the same way that we would have to do it for the full board. There are certain advisory committees, though, that do not have to meet Brown Act requirements. So if you meet all 4 of the bullets in the lower right-hand quadrant, if you meet all 4 of those, we do not have to worry about the Brown Act for that committee. So if the committee is advisory only and not decision-making, meaning, you know, they have to go back to the full board to make a decision. If the committee is composed only of board members, no other humans, no staff, no parents, nobody else is on there as a member except for the board. It has to be less than a quorum of the board, so fewer than 3. And it can't be a standing committee, meaning they can't have a regular meeting time, you know, the 3rd Thursday of every month. We can't do that. So if the board committee meets all 4 of these bullets, then that group is exempt from Brown Act requirements, does not have to meet them. One example I give for a committee that might meet this would be like if you want to evaluate the executive director. So the board might nominate 2 people to kind of do some interviews, fill out evaluation forms, you know, to talk to people, and then go back to the full board and kind of make a recommendation on that evaluation. So that's just one example. The Brown Act continues to prohibit serial meetings. A serial meeting is just what it sounds like, or maybe it doesn't sound like anything, but a serial meeting is it involves a majority of the members of the board, so again, 3, outside of a meeting, using a series of communications of any kind, either directly or through intermediaries, to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of school business within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. I know that's a mouthful. A serial meeting is typically the kind of thing that happens when we email each other. We don't really intend to, but we're emailing and somebody says, oh yeah, I think that I think we should change the color of the school uniforms or the school logo, you know, and then that turns into a discussion, or even just the mention of, I think we should, becomes a discussion on email if it's involving 3 or more board members. So don't do that, because that would violate the Brown Act. So the Brown Act says we cannot do that. We cannot have serial meetings. So email is an easy way of violating this. Text messages are also an easy way of violating this. I also want to flag social media posts. So if you all follow each other on social media and somebody is pretty active, one of the board members is pretty active and posts a lot, and including, you know, posts about Xterra or either of the schools, and then one of the other board members either likes it or, you know, writes in response or reposts or whatever. I'm not on social media a lot, so I don't have all the lingo, but you get the idea. That also could be construed as a serial meeting. So we just really want to be mindful of that and careful of that. And for emails, this is an old trick, so you probably know it. We just want to use the BCC or blind carbon copy line when we send out messages. The sort of corollary to this is that the Brown Act does allow for a one-way pushing out of information from the executive director or from the board chair. You know, we can update the board as to, you know, something important, urgent, whatever it was that happened on campus. We can send out that update. We just can't reply and have a chat about it. Similarly, board members can communicate with the executive director or with the board chair to ask questions, or with another staff member as well, to ask questions about something that may be coming up on the agenda. And so if that happens, the individual who's having those conversations has to remember to silo them. So if, you know, if people are going to Nicole and asking questions, she cannot share from A to B to C. She has to silo all of those conversations and keep them all very separate. So teleconference, well, I guess I'll talk first about meeting locations, and then I'll go into teleconference a little bit. Meeting locations and two-way teleconference locations, these are new law. Well, they were new in 2020. They became effective in 2020. The law set for the first time the jurisdiction of a charter school. Before, you know, when we were voluntarily complying with the Brown Act, you know, we have to admit students who reside anywhere in the state. And so you could have made an argument that our jurisdiction was the entire state. Some school districts said, no, your jurisdiction is my jurisdiction, our jurisdiction. And so you have to meet within the physical boundaries of the district. So the law clarified this. And we now know for an organization like Xterra that has 2 schools in the same county, your jurisdiction is Los Angeles County. So this is going to come up in the next couple of slides, but in order to have somebody participate in a meeting by teleconference, we have to have a majority of the board members somewhere physically present in Los Angeles County. You don't have to be together, you don't have to be at the school site, but 3 people have to be in LA County in order for that one board member to participate remotely. The other requirement that came to be for charter schools, and charter schools alone, nobody else who has to follow the Brown Act has to do this. The other requirement is that we have to set up a two-way teleconference location at each school site and each resource center. So I couldn't tell where your in-person meeting was, but if you were not at one of the school sites, you have to also set up a teleconference at the 2 school sites. If you are already at one of them, then you only have to set up one teleconference at the other school site. I'm not seeing any, or hearing any gasps, so it sounds like you probably, or I'm assuming you probably already are aware of that, and you're doing it. All right, so the last piece here, I think this is the last piece under what's a meeting, is about remote participation. And I said I had a couple of observations. So I'll dig into one of them here on an issue that I saw. So when a board member cannot or does not want to be in person for a meeting, they can choose to participate remotely. And there's two different ways to do that. Option one is what I'll call standard teleconference. This has been on the books, like I said, long before COVID. It's been on the books for a very, very long time. Option two is much more recent. It's a post-COVID thing, and it's actually set to expire January 1 of 26. So those, that's option one and option two. I've been doing brownout trainings for a long time, and I never thought I would say that teleconference, standard teleconference is the easier way to go, but I think it is. So in the event that somebody, a board member, specifically a board member, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to do this for a staff member. We don't have to do it for a contractor or a vendor like me, who's not a voting member. But if a board member cannot or does not want to be there in person, but still wants to participate in the board meeting, we have to, they have option one is to participate by standard teleconference. So in that, all votes have to be taken by roll call. This is the part that I wanted to highlight. I did hear a all in favor, and then several people said yes. That's not the proper procedure. As I understand, at least as I understand this meeting, it looked like one board member was participating remotely, at least based on the agenda. So we cannot do, in that situation, we cannot do an all in favor kind of situation. We have to do roll call for every vote, meaning somebody says each board member's name and then they say yes or no. So I just want to emphasize that a little bit. Next, the agenda has to be posted at all teleconference locations. So hopefully this is, again, not news to you, but if you're participating in a board meeting from San Francisco, you would have to post the agenda at your hotel or Airbnb or family or wherever it is that you're staying. You would have to post the agenda for the entire posting time. If you are participating in the meeting from Paris, you would have to do the same thing. Next, each teleconference location has to be identified in the notice and the agenda, which means a couple of things. First, it means you cannot be participating in the meeting while driving or while commuting because you won't have had a fixed address. We won't have a location to put on the agenda. It also means that if you break your ankle the day before a board meeting and don't feel comfortable driving to the meeting, we cannot just stand up a standard teleconference because we would have needed to know that 72 hours before the meeting at the time that we posted the agenda. So this will not work for a last minute change in plans or, change in what you want to do. Fourth requirement is that each teleconference location has to be accessible to the public, by which we mean Americans with Disabilities Act accessible. So if you work on the second floor of an office building, we have to have an elevator to get people up there. So that's just a requirement. If you're meeting at the school site, obviously that's taken care of. Fifth, members of the public have the right to address the board directly at each teleconference location. So we'll put the address on the agenda and people could show up. And if they show up, then they have the right to be able to hear the meeting and participate in the meeting from your location. I should also say, it looked like the agenda listed the person who was going to be at the address. We actually don't have to do that. We don't have to list the person. You can just say, here's the meeting location, whatever the address is, teleconference location, 123 Main Street. And you don't have to say who's there. You may want to protect that address. And then last, a quorum of the board has to participate from within the school's jurisdiction. And this was what I just talked about on the other slide. We now know that our jurisdiction is Los Angeles County, the boundaries of Los Angeles County. So as long as 3 people are physically present for the meeting somewhere in LA County, then we have met this requirement. They don't have to be together, they don't have to be at a school site. But we do need for one of the board members to use the standard teleconference, we do have to have at least 3 people physically present in Los Angeles County. All right, so then the one that's a little more difficult here, the kind of newfangled option for remote attendance would be video conference. And so this is a response to COVID, though I will note that as it's currently written, it's set to expire on January 1 of 26. So that's the end of this year. So I might be teaching you about something that goes away, but there's also a possibility that the legislature will re-up this. So generally speaking, option 2 here is that you can attend a meeting remotely by video conference, and this allows for relaxed video conferencing requirement if the board member has a personal emergency or just cause for why they can't be there. That means that we can have video conferencing without putting the teleconference location on the agenda and without allowing the public access to that teleconference location. So it's in some ways, it's a much more comfortable kind of situation. The board member who's utilizing this has to participate through both audio and visual technology. So you have to be, just that. You have to be on screen and you have to be able to be heard. Standard teleconference, you don't have to be on video. Now, this is kind of how government works, right? They give you something, the legislature gives you something, which is making it easier as we were transitioning from fully distanced COVID days to coming back in person and people needing a little bit of extra time. So the legislature enacted this, but then they said, well, but you can only use this if a quorum of your board participates in person from a single physical location in your jurisdiction. That means 3 people, in order for one person to use this, 3 people have to be together in person at the same location. Whereas standard teleconference, all of you could be participating remotely. All 5 of you could be participating remotely. Here, we have to have at least 3 of you together, physically together in the same space. So it makes it a little bit difficult. For definitions, emergency circumstances means a physical or family medical emergency that would prevent a member from attending the meeting in person. Just cause is a child care or caregiving need of a close relative, a child, a parent, a grandparent, a grandchild, sibling, I'm running out of fingers, sibling, spouse, domestic partner, that would require you, sorry about that, that would require you to participate remotely. Or it's a contagious illness that prevents a member from attending in person, or it's a need related to a physical or mental disability as defined in law, or it's travel on official business of the governing board of Xterra or of another state or local agency. So if you meet those, you could use the just cause exception, or you could use the emergency circumstances exception. If you are participating by teleconference based on an emergency, you have to make that request to the board as soon as possible. The board actually has to vote on it, which is a little bit unusual. So we don't have to go into detail about what your emergency is, but some sort of acknowledgement that the emergency meets the legal definition, and then the board would vote on letting you participate that way, participate remotely. There are some other strings placed on this, the number of times that we can use these in a calendar year. So just cause you can use twice in a calendar year. Each individual board member can use it twice in a calendar year. And then under no circumstances can a board member participate in meetings only by video conference for more than 3 consecutive months, 20% of the regular meetings in a calendar year, or more than 2 meetings if the board regularly meets fewer than 10 times in a calendar year. That is a lot to keep track of. We actually created like a kind of a tracking sheet. So if that would be helpful for you, we're happy to share it. But what we've generally found is that there are so many strings on this, on this option that a lot of board members don't use it or don't want to use it. Can't use it or don't want to use it. The last couple of strings here are kind of unusual things. If you're participating using this exception, you have to announce if there's somebody who's 18 years or older in the room with you and the general nature of their relationship to you. Kind of a bizarre thing, but that's what we have to do. And I think, yeah, so that's it on that option 2 piece. Happy to take any questions, or else I'm just going to keep rolling. All right. So now we know we're having a meeting under the Brown Act. What kind of notice and agenda requirements do we have to meet? So our general rule is that the agenda has to be posted properly in advance of the meeting. It has to include a brief description of the items to be transacted or discussed. With very few exceptions, if something's not on the agenda, the board cannot discuss it. That's kind of the ball game here under the Brown Act. If something's not on our agenda, we can't discuss it. Like we can only discuss the things that are on our agenda. So some exceptions here, just like I gave you exceptions to the definition of a meeting. There could be a situation where there's an emergency or a dire emergency. And if that's the case, then our notice and agenda requirements really drop off. We don't have to, we just have a lot more flexibility. But emergency and dire emergency are defined in statute. And so we are limited to those particular definitions. It's like a terrorist threat or a work stoppage. It's not, oh my gosh, I forgot to fill out this form. I need the board to meet right away so that I can submit it. Does not count for that. Our next exception here would be a determination by a 2/3 vote of the board members that there is a need to take immediate action, and the need for immediate action came to the attention of the board after the agenda was posted. Excuse me. In this circumstance, the board is essentially voting to add something onto the agenda. It's rare that you would actually do this in practice. Again, we have to show that there's a need to take immediate action, and the need for that action came to your attention after the agenda was posted. It's rare to have both of those. It's also rare for something to come up in such a time that you couldn't just call a special meeting to handle it. So essentially, if you're meeting in the afternoon, something would have had to come up in the morning that the staff needed the board's input on. So it's pretty unusual that you would use that exception. The third exception would be if you start a meeting on a Monday. I guess today's Tuesday, but if you start a meeting on a Monday, you don't make it through the entire agenda. You can pick up that same meeting again on Thursday without posting a new agenda. Really unusual situation. Almost never happens for charter schools. Kind of once we're together, we're going to make it through the agenda. Now, numbers 4, 5, and 6, these are just reminders to you that even though the Brown Act is like putting all these kind of limitations on how you can communicate and like how you make decisions and all that, you still are a human and you can still have human reactions. So if somebody comes in and shares some difficult, like a difficult situation and is looking for help, you can direct staff, board members can direct staff to follow up with that person and help them. Board members can make brief responses, they can ask clarifying questions, and they can make announcements during a meeting. And then they can also identify future agenda items, things that they want to make sure to be talking about in the next meeting agenda or in a couple meetings. We just can't get into a lot of depth there. I'm sure these numbers are familiar to you. For regular meetings, we post the agenda 72 hours in advance. For special meetings, we post 24 hours in advance. And for emergency meetings, we post just 1 hour in advance. Just a reminder that every day counts as a posting day. Weekends count, Saturday and Sunday count, days when school is non-session count, everything counts as a posting day. Still on the agenda, we have to post the agenda publicly. So that means we have to physically post in at least one location. You probably do it at both schools, but to physically post in one location. And it has to be all the way outside of any locked gates or fences or doors. So if you put it in the main office, but somebody can't get to the main office unless the gate is open, that won't work. It has to be kind of all the way on the outside. We also have to post the agenda on our website through a prominent direct link on the homepage. This is the part that I had a little bit of concern about. I did not see a prominent direct link to the agenda on the Xterra website's homepage. Maybe I missed it, but I do want to flag that I did not see it, and I would encourage you to change your website a little bit to get that done. So I think I had to click, I went down to the bottom and I found the board, and then that took me to the board, and then there was one more link to get to the agenda.
Yeah, I think it is on the board page. So you have to go to the board to get to the agendas.
So it's like one click
For
to get
each
to the board.
meeting, it should be posted on the top of the front page. Notably, if you looked today, Janelle, and this is a good call out, we had someone else post today for today's meeting because we just had a staffing change.
Oh,
But that's a good call out for me to review with the whole team of posters that they are posting the 72-hour rule posting right on the homepage. And then all of the agendas, of course, live on our board page. But did just as this was the first time, was somebody different handling that 72-hour post? That's a really good call out.
yeah. So just, I mean, you know, LA Unified, I don't think is listening in. Well, I don't think is listening in, but just, you know, to note going forward, and I don't need to belabor it. All right. In terms of the content of the agenda, we are looking for, the Brown Act is looking for about 20 words or so per agenda item, as well as public testimony time. So we always have to leave time for public comment on agenda items and on non-agenda items. And then for the agenda, you know, we want to give them enough, we want to put in enough description so that somebody who's making a decision about, you know, do I go home and cook dinner, or should I go to this meeting? We want to give them enough information to be able to make that decision. In your case, maybe it's lunch. But you get what I'm saying. For closed session, we always want to use the safe harbor language. That's something that the legislature has developed. The legislature has written the agenda descriptions. And so if you use what they have provided, what they've said is you can't be sued for not giving enough information. So they probably all look very familiar to you for the closed session topics. We do want to give verbal notice before we go into closed session. So we would say the board is now going to go into closed session, and we are going to be talking about public employee performance evaluation. We would just read whatever's on the agenda. And then after you have your closed session and you come back to open session, you would make a public report out of any action that was taken, and then the roll call vote or abstention of every board member. Question there?
No, we got an A+ on that section.
Amazing. I like it. And, you know, a lot of times you go into closed session and you won't actually take a vote. There won't be any action item. So you just report out no action. All right. Last piece is here on notice and agenda requirements. So a reminder about executive compensation, that we can only approve the top educational executives contract during a regular meeting, cannot do it during a special meeting. We also have to orally report out the salary schedule, and benefits in open session. Next, the your votes are public. So the votes of individual board members have to be publicly reported both during the meeting and in the minutes. So we're just kind of communicating with the public the best we can who voted which way. And then the board minutes, we always want to make sure that we include all material motions and votes. All right, I think, yep, that's that on topic number 3. That was definitely the bulk of the Brown Act piece. So we're kind of turning the corner and then we'll move on to our other topics. Still staying within our 2 hours.
Halfway there. Look, everybody.
I know, I know. So what are the public's rights under the Brown Act? Kind of a trick question because the public has a lot of rights. The public has a right to give testimony both on agenda and non-agenda items. The public has a right to tape or broadcast your meeting. We cannot have any conditions of attendance, so you can't require a driver's license or a library card or anything like that for somebody to attend the meeting. We have to meet in non-discriminatory facilities, again, Americans with Disabilities Act accessible. Same kind of standard. The public has a right to a copy, excuse me, of the agenda and other public writings. So if somebody is looking for a copy of the agenda, we just give it to them as a matter of course. They don't have to go through a Public Records Act process. And then if you have public comment, then you're timing that per individual. We would give twice as much time to anybody who's using live language interpretation during the meeting. So if we have 3 minutes for English speakers, we would give 6 minutes for non-English speakers. A new-ish rule, I think this came into play in 2023. This is a rule that authorizes the board chair or their designee to remove or cause the removal of somebody who's disrupting the meeting. This was, this has not always been on the books. This is pretty new. But I do think this was added in response to the vitriol and rage that we saw during meetings during COVID. So I think this is a pretty direct response to that. The board chair has the authority to remove somebody who's disrupting a meeting. Disrupting means engaging in behavior during a board meeting that actually disrupts, disturbs, impedes, or renders infeasible the orderly conduct of that meeting, including failing to comply with the rules that you've set for your meetings, and engaging in behavior that constitutes a true threat, the use of force or a true threat of force. So I truly hope this is something that never comes up for you, that you never have any need to utilize this, but if you do, this right is out there. Generally speaking, we would have to give a warning before removing the person, telling them that their conduct is disrupting the meeting, and if they don't stop their behavior, it could result in their removal. After you've given the warning, then you could remove them. The warning requirement does not apply if somebody's behavior constitutes a true threat of force. This would be fairly scary. True threat of force would be a threat that has sufficient indicia of intent and seriousness that a reasonable observer would perceive it to be an actual threat to use force by the person making the threat. So, again, I hope that this never comes to pass, but if you have a very raucous meeting and you're not able to actually do your business, the board has the authority, the board chair has the authority to remove one or more individuals. Back on a lighter subject, closed session. All of the work and decisions and business that you do happens in open session. That's the whole point of the Brown Act. So confidentiality is required when you do go into closed session. No board member or staff member or other invitee can disclose out of closed session what the board talked about in closed session. It's private, it's confidential. Unless the board votes to make it public. So what I do is think about closed session as, I try to apply the Las Vegas rule to closed session. So what happens in closed session stays in closed session. So that's kind of a general handle for you. The closed session topics I would expect are fairly familiar to all of you. We've got the personnel topics, public employee discipline, dismissal, release, performance evaluation, employee appointment, employee hiring, those kinds of things may be your closed session topics for personnel. The idea is that just because somebody works for a public entity does not mean that they give up all of their confidentiality rights as an employee. you can go into closed session to discuss real estate negotiations or labor negotiations. So you would be meeting with your negotiator in both of those areas, in either of those areas, as needed. And again, the idea is that just because we're a public entity does not mean that we have to give away our strategies. If there's a threat to the school building, you can meet with security people. So the police department or the district attorney, you can meet with them in closed session. If you have actual or anticipated litigation, you can meet with your legal counsel in closed session. And that is the legal counsel who represents the school on that particular matter. If any of the board members happen to be attorneys, that wouldn't count. It has to be the attorney who's representing the school on the particular matter. And then last here on the list is student discipline. So just to be clear, the Brown Act does not mention student discipline. This is a level of confidentiality that we have inferred for students based on state case law, as well as FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It's a federal law. So we've inferred from the law these additional protections for students. And so in the event that student discipline gets to the board, first of all, it would probably be an appeal of an expulsion. But in the event that gets to the board, you can meet in closed session for that discussion. I already was a little heavy-handed with you about penalties and remedies on charter revocation anyway, so I'll skip that piece, but I'll say, generally speaking, for the Brown Act, if someone is going to accuse the board of having violated the Brown Act, they would likely seek civil remedies, so they would go to civil court. They could tell you that the judge could say that the board action is null and void. So the board may have spent a bunch of money on on a contract that just disappears. Injunctive relief could be obtained to either force the board to do something or prevent the board from doing it based on a Brown Act violation. And then the prevailing plaintiff, so if we lose, the plaintiff would be awarded attorney's fees. So another way that it gets expensive. Believe it or not, criminal penalties could apply if one or more board members intends to deprive the public of information that they know that the public has a right to. Criminal penalties could apply. Not a lot of district attorneys have the time or inclination to prosecute under the Brown Act, but it is out there. And like I said, I've already talked about charter revocation. It would be unusual for Brown Act violations to prompt a revocation action. But a lot of times if a charter is going down a revocation path for other reasons, a lot of times we see Brown Act violations kind of lumped in. Then the procedure generally would be that somebody would bring a complaint to the board. I think that you violated the Brown Act during your January meeting. Here's my evidence. And we would say, thanks for bringing this to our attention. Actually, everything is just fine. We handled this correctly. Here's our evidence. See you at the next meeting. Or if we've done something incorrectly, the cure is generally to put that item or those items onto the next meeting agenda and vote on them again. So it sounds fairly simple. It typically is fairly simple. Just know that there are different timelines for different kinds of Brown Act violations, but just generally, I think it's like a 90-day limit that they could go back, that they could reach backwards. So people are not going to be contacting you saying 3 years ago you violated the Brown Act. It's usually a much shorter period of time. All right, that was a very long section. I promise the other ones obviously cannot be that much longer or that long. But just giving you back to the roadmap and where we are. Happy to take any questions. I'm not seeing any, so I'm just going to keep rolling. All right, so our next topic, sorry, just locating us again. We're still in the transparency piece around the ethics training. All right, so the Public Records Act does apply to charter schools. First of all, Public Records Act does apply to charter schools. The Public Records Act its name kind of says it all. most governmental records are public and are subject to be requested by the public, and we would turn around and provide them to the public. The legislative intent behind Public Records Act is what it says in the legislative intent is the legislature, mindful of the right of individuals to privacy, finds and declares that access to information concerning the conduct of the people's business is a fundamental and necessary right of every person in the state. So anybody has authority or standing or whatever to make a Public Records Act request, and we do have to respond to those requests. Generally speaking, kind of our life cycle here, you would first receive a request, you would review it, you send out an initial response. Typically, we've got 10 days for that initial response, and that's 10 calendar days, not 10 school days. Send out the initial response, got your request, we're working on it, we'll get back to you at X time. Then we process records, we find things that are responsive to what they're asking. We send our final response. And then afterwards, we wait to see, do they have more questions? Will there be more fallout? You know, has somebody like tapped into something nefarious that we've done and now it's going to be public? You know, obviously that's not going to be the case for Xterra, but that's, you know, things that we would be thinking about. So that's our general life cycle. I want to be clear, and also I'm mindful of the fact that most PRA requests are going to go to staff and not to the board. So it's a little bit misplaced to be teaching the board about this, but I also think it's important for you to know generally that this stuff exists. So a PRA request, I want to be clear, could come in any form. It does not have to actually mention the Public Records Act. Question or no? Okay, doesn't have to actually mention PRA by name. What we would advise is to treat any request for records or information as a PRA request, with the caveat that if LA Unified is asking you for something, we do not treat that as a PRA. We don't put them on a timeline. They're our authorizer. The law says that they can make reasonable requests for information. But generally speaking, if somebody says offhandedly or pointedly, send me this, treat it as a PRA. We want to, if they do say, you know, send me your policy, we would write something up that says, hey, we've received a PRA request asking for this particular policy, and then we send a copy of that to the requester. It helps us keep it organized on our end. So the law says around receipt and review of the PRA request that it does not allow limitations on access to a public record based on the purpose for which the record is being requested, if the record is otherwise subject to disclosure. So basically, the person's motive in making a request is essentially irrelevant. Sometimes PRAs indicate some sort of like disturbance in the force. Somebody is upset about something and they think that they can bring the school to heel by burying us in paperwork. And so if that's the case, you know, you may think to yourself, I don't have to give this to them. They're just going to use it to harm us. And it's just not the case. Like, we have to kind of be the bigger person here. And just, you know, we have to comply no matter what the reason is for the request. So processing the records, what is a public record, right? By law, by definition, it includes any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business that is prepared, owned, used, or retained by any state or local agency, regardless of the physical form that it's stored in or its characteristics. Longer definition of a writing. So a writing could be a handwriting, a typewriting, a printing, a photostatting. I'm not going to read all of these. Email or fax, or every other means of recording upon a tangible thing, any form of communication or representation, kind of whatsoever. So writing is defined very broadly as it possibly could. And it is intended to include anything that the legislature could think of. Oh, I think that's what this says from the court. This definition is intended to cover every conceivable kind of record that's involved in the governmental process and will pertain to any new form of record-keeping instrument as it's developed. So this is like kind of the PRA does change to keep up with current technology. Only purely personal information unrelated to the conduct of the public's business could be considered exempt from this definition. So it really is intended to be everything. There was a kind of a big deal case, City of San Jose in 2017, that I think clarified some pieces around the Public Records Act request. Basically, the City of San Jose was trying to exclude some records from a PRA. And the court said a city employee's, I think this went all the way to the state Supreme Court, a city employee's writings about public business are not excluded from PRA requests simply because they've been sent, received, or stored in a personal account. So if you think, oh, I know how to get around a PRA request, I'll just use my Gmail or my Yahoo Mail or my BlackBerry or my phone, or, you know, whatever it is you think you're going to use as a way to get around a potential Public Records Act request, it won't work. So if you're communicating about school business or the conduct of the public, the conduct of the public's business, it doesn't matter what device you did it on. It doesn't matter what account you did it from. That is still subject to a PRA. When we drill down into this, the factors that we look at are the content of what the message is, its context and purpose, the audience to whom it was directed, and then was it prepared by an employee who was acting or purporting to act within the scope of their employment? If yes, then that becomes subject to disclosure. We start from the standpoint that every record is disclosable. Anything that anybody could ask for is disclosable. And then we say, okay, does it qualify for an exemption? And there are several exemptions that can be helpful. Pending litigation, for example. You could imagine being in a court case, in a lawsuit back and forth, and instead of waiting for discovery, the other side says, oh, well, they're a public agency, so I'm just going to PRA them and get all the information that I want from my lawsuit. No, we're protected from that. This would apply only during ongoing litigation, but basically it prevents a litigant from using the PRA to gain earlier or greater access to records outside of the rules of discovery. It does protect documents that are specifically prepared for use in litigation. Once the litigation is over, settlements are generally disclosable. And attorney's fees and invoices while litigation is pending are exempt. Other exemptions are for personnel, medical, or similar files. So we don't want an unwarranted invasion in privacy. If somebody requests a personnel file, there's a lot that we can protect there. We do need to be very careful if we're preparing a lot of documents that we're not accidentally scooping up something that would otherwise be private. Evaluations are exempt. And then when it comes to investigation reports, personnel exemption can be overridden if the allegation being investigated are substantial in nature and well-founded. So there may be cause that we actually do have to produce investigation report, but it's a very factually specific determination there. If we have something in draft form, it would not be disclosable. So if it's something that's not kept in the ordinary course of business and the public interest in withholding the information outweighs the public interest in disclosure, then we do not have to provide drafts. Some records are exempted by federal or state law. If something's attorney-client privileged, it's exempt. Under FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, identifiable student records are exempt from PRA. So I just want to say again about the attorney-client privilege, any emails from our office are not disclosable under the Public Records Act request. And there's also a catch-all exemption really to protect information, which is a balancing test of the public interest in disclosing something versus the public interest in keeping it private. And there are circumstances where the public interest in keeping something private actually does outweigh the interest in making it public. And in those cases, we do not have to disclose. Generally speaking, you're not going to get PRAs that have to go down to that level of sensitivity, but it might happen. There are some exemptions that protect basically pre-decision discussions. So the deliberative process, that's kind of along the lines of drafts. Then after we produce our records, if somebody wants to enforce their rights under the PRA, they can institute proceedings for injunctive or declaratory relief or seek a writ of mandate to force us to produce more. The court will award court costs and reasonable fees to the plaintiff if the plaintiff wins. So again, could be expensive. Generally speaking, the costs and fees are paid by the public agency and don't become a personal liability of any public official. If the court finds that the plaintiff's case against us is frivolous, then it awards court costs and fees to the public agency. A few notes on kind of best practices around electronic communications. You know, because school communications on a personal device or through a personal account are disclosable, we do recommend that employees and board members only use school-issued email and school-issued devices for all communications touching on the public business. It's just a way of protecting you from having your personal records kind of combed through. I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but we want to keep school-related email communication professional. Assume that anything you write can be published. And that may mean that it takes you an extra 2 minutes before you send your email, but just have that in the back of your mind. We talked about this in the Brown Act, but we would strongly discourage discussing public business on any social media. Excuse me. And we similarly, just as I talked about in the Brown Act, discourage employees and board members from using text messages to communicate about public business, because again, those could be subject to disclosure. And it's uncomfortable to have somebody searching through your phone to find that information. And then if you don't, we would recommend adopting a record retention policy that addresses all records, including email retention, because what it would do is allow you to destroy records. And if we're destroying records on a regular basis, I don't mean, being basically overly destroying records, but if we're destroying records on a regular basis, there's less that the public can only ask for requests so far back. So that could be in your best interest to follow that policy. All right, I'm aware of the time. I know we've got 30 minutes for the last 4 sections, but we are right on track here with these slides. We've gone through the biggest ones. So the next topic is personal financial gain. So around conflicts of interest and the Form 700. Conflicts of interest, our broad definition here is that a conflict of interest arises when an individual who has a private financial interest in the outcome of a corporate contract or a public decision participates in the decision-making process or influences or attempts to influence others who are making that contract. So if you have a private financial interest and nevertheless you still participate in that decision, you have met the definition of a conflict of interest under the law. A conflict of interest is a clash between the individual's duty to his or her office and then their own personal interests. Those two things should never be clashing. If they are, you need to step away from one of them. Either step away from the board or step away from your personal thing. The most common types of financial interests that are regulated by conflicts laws. So that would be ownership or investment in a business entity, investment in real property, your source of income, your source of gifts, and your effect and any effect on your personal finances. Generally, the financial interests of immediate family members and board members typically are covered. So this would include you and your spouse and your dependent children. When in the realm of conflicts of interest, there are two main statutes. One that we've always followed, which is the Political Reform Act, and one that we kind of newly followed. This was part of the changes in 2020. Government Code Section 1090. Section 1090 is really the granddaddy of all of these conflict issues. It is the most draconian. It is the most scary. It is just like it carries the most penalties, and it could result in jail time if we violate it. So Section 1090, we do not mess around with. It would involve a public official who's either an officer, a board member, or an employee who is making a public contract for sale or purchase. And that public official has a financial interest in that contract. If that happens, we would violate Section 1090. Keep in mind, if one board member has a personal financial interest in a contract coming before the board, the entire board is wiped out from voting on that particular contract. Even if the contract is with the best vendor at the best price and all of that, and the interested board member abstains, that conflict still is imputed on everybody. And so the entire board is wiped out from voting on that particular item. So if you have a personal financial interest in something coming before the board, we need to talk immediately and we need to mitigate. The phrase making a public contract is defined very broadly. It doesn't just mean, the final vote to approve. It applies to all of the earliest discussions, the planning, the solicitation for bids, and all of that. Statute is definitely the tougher standard to meet, and the violation of Section 1090 is a felony, and the contract would be void. There have been charter school board members and leaders who have gone to jail over violating Section 1090. So this is a real thing, and we're very careful around it. That's one statute. The other statute is the Political Reform Act, which sort of pales in comparison because it just doesn't carry the same penalties. Essentially, though, the Political Reform Act would involve, again, a public official who is participating in or attempting to influence a governmental decision. They have a qualifying financial interest, they or their spouse or dependent children, and that financial interest is material. Then what the Political Reform Act requires is disclosure and recusal from the decision-making process. Now, if you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, you just told me if there's a financial interest from the board, then nobody can vote on it. That's true. So the Government Code Section 1090 covers a lot of the same ground as the Political Reform Act, but not all of the same ground. So in most cases, yes, nobody on the board would be able to vote for that. But if we're talking about a vote on a decision that's not about a contract, then there might be a little more room for that person to disclose and recuse themselves. The Political Reform Act, also, this was a post-Watergate statute in California, or not statute, it was a proposition in the post-Watergate era. So the Political Reform Act also creates our requirement to adopt a conflict of interest code. Xterra did this a very long time ago. We should always update it every couple of years or just look at it every couple of years. But the conflict of interest code identifies who has to file the Form 700, and then it assigns the disclosure categories that we have to meet. Hoping that this is not new, the Form 700, also known as a Statement of Economic Interest, has to be filed by the board members and other top officials when you first start with the school, once annually by April 1st, so that's coming up, And then when you leave, you have to do it within 30 days. There are penalties for failure to file. Could be criminal charges, not likely, but there are civil or administrative actions by the Fair Political Practices Commission or a private citizen. And then you could be fined, I think it's a very low number, like $10 a day, but for a long period of time. So we have to get those filed timely. In addition to Section 1090 and the Political Reform Act, there are just this kind of general concept of conflicts of interest. A public official engaging in a transaction or influencing a decision, creating an appearance of impropriety, even if they don't have a specific financial interest, then what we're looking at is, does that kind of meet the sniff test or the smell test? So if a board member's child participated in academic decathlon and the board member was pushing very hard to spend more school resources on academic decathlon than on the volleyball team, that might look like an appearance of impropriety. Hey, look at that. We're continuing to move along on our roadmap here. So that was our conflicts of interest. Next up is bribery and gifts. Again, in the general topic of ethics, when we're trying to kind of protect the public interest and keep the public interest paramount, we want to avoid being bribed, avoid bribing somebody else, and we have to be really careful about gifts. So the definition of a bribe is to persuade someone to act in your favor, typically illegally or dishonestly, by a gift of money or some other inducement. Is a gift always a bribe? No. I mean, no is the answer. There are some things that we have to look at. What is the intent of the giver and what is the intent of the receiver? Does the giver of the gift have business before the board? For example, does some curriculum company want Xterra to vote to adopt its curriculum and they happen to give you 5, 10 tickets to the Rams game? Is that a gift? Is that a bribe? Right? We would really need to think about that. Is the giver attempting to influence a decision? Are they trying to get in there before a decision is made and kind of push you in one direction or another? Is the receiver participating in a quid pro quo? You give me this, I vote for your thing. And then also, could the gift have the appearance of a bribe? Is this something that somebody skeptically looking at it from the outside might object to? If those start to go in the yes direction, then we would start to wonder whether this gift actually is a bribe. The next question is this, would this actually rise to the level of a financial interest under Section 1090 and the Political Reform Act? So the penal code, meaning this is criminal, has definitions around bribery. So every executive or ministerial officer, employee, or appointee of the state or county or political subdivision, that would be us, we'd be a political subdivision, who asks, receives, or agrees to receive any bribe upon any agreement or understanding that his or her vote, opinion, or action upon any matter then pending, or that might be brought before them in their official capacity, shall be influenced thereby, is punishable by imprisonment, and in addition forfeits their office, employment, or appointment, and is forever disqualified from holding any office, employment, appointment in this state. It's not, we are likely a political subdivision, but I don't want to find that out for sure. I hope this goes without saying, but please don't bribe other public officials.
Unless, no, I'm kidding, Janelle. Some of us are
Unless it's really
reacting to
important.
current events.
Unless there's a
Better.
really important reason to, yeah. Yeah, I hear you.
Yes, we do not have immunity from the Supreme Court, so we will not do that.
No, I don't expect so, yeah. So every person, there's also a criminal statute for every person who gives or offers that bribe, just in the same way as criminal penalties could apply if you receive it. Now, gifts, I understand this seems like a weird thing to be talking about. You all, this is your volunteer gig. Again, thank you for spending 2 hours of your day with me doing this. But this is your volunteer time, and you probably have a job or some other thing that you do, other volunteer stuff. You've got families, you've got all this stuff, you live these lives. But in addition to that, you are a board member, and there are limitations to the gifts that you can receive during the time that you're a board member. The general rule is that you cannot accept more than $590 from one source in a calendar year. Gifts worth more than $50 have to be reported. That sounds like a drag. There are a lot of exceptions that should make it less of a drag. You can receive gifts on special occasions, birthdays or holidays, from anyone, if the gift giving and taking is generally proportional. However, if you're friends with a lobbyist, it's not a gift. We have to be really careful. So if you're friends with lobbyists, don't take anything from them, just as a general rule, just do not. If you receive an inheritance that is not defined as a gift, it's not reportable. If you are exchanging gifts with family members, close family members, those are not reportable. So if your spouse gives you an expensive necklace, you don't have to put that on your reporting. And also you don't have to be limited to $590 in those gifts. Exemptions, excuse me, also include your long-term friendships. So if you've been friends with someone over a period of time and the gift giving and taking are proportional, again, as long as they're not a lobbyist, that's fine. A dating relationship, a bona fide dating relationship is fine. You can take and receive gifts. Sometimes you might, I brought this up as an example, sometimes you might receive a gift that either exceeds the $590 threshold, or you think might kind of look like an appearance of impropriety. You can donate that gift. You can turn right around and donate that gift to Xterra or somebody else. You could return the gift. You could say, no, thank you, thank you very much, but I can't accept this. I use the example of getting tickets to Rams games. I haven't been out there, but I would imagine many of the seats are very expensive. So that might put you over the threshold. You could donate those to the school, and the school could have an auction or something like that, and the school would benefit from the proceeds. So there are ways to kind of work around that. All right, I told you we'd make it. We're on our 4th topic out of 5, use of public funds. So we'll talk about some of the principles governing the use of public funds and the prohibition on gifts of public funds. We're always kind of, everything we do as Xterra board members is thinking about public scrutiny, is thinking about things through the lens of public scrutiny. So all state, federal, and local funds that are received by charter schools are considered public funds, and they do have to be used to support the educational mission of the organization. Donated funds, fundraising money, might be considered public funds upon donation. There's a kind of a complicated test that we would need to apply to figure out whether, if somebody writes Xterra a check, does that immediately become a public fund now that we've received it, or is there a way that we can earmark it? Generally, if somebody says, I'm writing you a check for $10,000 to support a banquet breakfast for teachers at the end of the year, you can hold that aside and spend it just for that banquet for teachers. And in that way, you are providing something extra to teachers without having to worry about, spending public funds for doing that. So that is something that we can do. If you do get a check like that, just talk with us very briefly, and we'll advise you on how best to record it and all of that. Our public scrutiny test here is for each transaction, you would ask, would the taxpaying public view the expenditure as necessary to support public education? If yes, you know, then we've passed the test and it makes sense to spend the public dollars in that way. If you're questioning whether the expenditure is appropriate, it may not be. You know, if the school is buying gift cards for teachers, is that really, is that really a necessary thing to support public education, given that we give teachers salaries, maybe we give them a bonus? We have to be really mindful of whether that actually is an appropriate use of public funds. Oh, sorry. Misuse of public funds is an issue. Persons who are responsible for receipt, safekeeping, transfer, or disbursement of public money are prohibited from appropriating that money for personal use. I think that probably goes without saying. They're prohibited from keeping false records or falsifying accounts, and they're prohibited from willfully obstructing lawful payments. That actually does have some kind of current events implications there, at least in California, but not an issue here. Embezzlement, not okay. So the fraudulent appropriation of property by a person to whom it has been entrusted, you can't take it. You can't take public dollars and take them for yourselves. That's not lawful. We sometimes run into questions around gifts of public funds. So there's a general prohibition against lending or gifting public money. For charter schools, we have to show a nexus between the expenditure and the mission of the school. The expenditure should be budgeted for by the board, and they have to further the charter school's public purpose. We evaluate each of these expenditures on a case-by-case basis. Purely personal items or money benefiting an individual without any consideration are not okay. You cannot pay for a board member's vacation. You cannot pay for the CEO's gym membership unless the latter happen to be part of their negotiated contract. FCMAT, the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team, has a list of, this is just a sample, so this is not all encompassing, but a sample list of unallowable expenditures. So you cannot spend public dollars on a social gathering where a meal is provided for an employee recognition, such as Teacher Appreciation, Secretary Day, etc. So that example I gave about somebody writing a check for $10,000 for a staff breakfast, you can do that, but just using school funds for that, not okay, according to FCMAT. Contributions or donations to religious, community, charity, or other nonprofit groups, we can't convert our public dollars in that way. Cannot purchase flowers for a personal gift. Can't give flowers or other items to convey compassion, sympathy, or meet a perceived moral obligation. To be clear, people can collect funds and express compassion to one another in that way with personal dollars. We just can't use Xterra money to do that. Cannot give presents or gifts to anyone, including employees, volunteers, or students. Cannot spend public dollars on alcohol. Cannot spend public dollars on a holiday or other staff party or picnic. We also cannot reimburse employees for the mileage from their residence to their place of work. The expectation is that you get yourself to work. Sample list of allowable expenses. So this would be school furniture, supplies and equipment, teacher and faculty salaries, uniforms and regalia for band, choir, athletic teams, caps and gowns for graduation, instructional materials and textbooks, maintenance of buildings and facilities, research and promotional activities to advance public education, awards to students for excellence or to employees for exceptional contributions, if it's in the board policy, flowers or decorations for a school award ceremony, transportation for students, refreshments or meals in meetings, where we're talking about school business, or snacks, refreshments, and food for students during the course of the school day that are deemed to contribute to the educational process. For example, sometimes schools will have milkshakes or some other kind of treat for kids who show up on testing day, because we got to get that 95% participation. So our very last piece here, don't have too many more slides. We're definitely going to make it. I'm just going to try to stretch it just a tiny bit, but I think we'll end a little bit early here. So the last piece that we're talking about under ethics is fair process, where we are eliminating bias. There's a prohibition on incompatible offices, and we have to take care to avoid nepotism. Again, I understand the current moment in the country where we are, and some of these might seem a little bit surprising given what the federal government is doing. So again, fair processes, we do want to eliminate bias. We are still standing up for elimination of bias. In every action, decision, and policy, the board and each board member has to uphold the anti-discrimination laws required of the charter school. It is very clear that still in California law, we cannot discriminate on the basis of disability, gender, gender identity, gender expression, nationality, race or ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or any other characteristic listed in the definition of hate crimes, as well as immigration status. Those are the things that Xterra cannot discriminate based on. Your charter say it, the law says it, district policy says it. It just is true. So we have to take care there. In circumstances where a board member is acting as a fact finder, like on the expulsion appeal, courts have recognized that an individual, so the student or their parent, has the right to a tribunal that meets standards of impartiality. Biased decision makers are impermissible, and even the probability of unfairness is to be avoided. The factor that's most often considered destructive of administrative board impartiality is bias arising from the pecuniary interests of board members. So personal embroilment of the dispute will also void the administrative decision, although neither prior knowledge of the factual background which bears on a decision nor pre-hearing expressions on the result disqualifies an administrative body from acting on the matter before it. So in the times when a board acts as a holds a hearing and acts as a finder of fact, we have to make sure that we're eliminating bias. There is such a thing as the doctrine of incompatible offices, and we have to avoid it. So the doctrine says that a public official who is holding two public offices simultaneously, and they're incompatible with each other, meaning that they have overlapping jurisdictions, that is not okay. So if you are a charter school board member and you're also on the city planning board or something like that, I'm blanking on what LA calls it, that might be a potential incompatible office. If you're sitting on a board that might make a decision around a charter school, obviously sitting on the LA Unified Board is an obvious example. But if there are other boards that you might sit on that might have an impact on the way you make decisions at Xterra and at that other entity. So if somebody is holding those two offices, those might be deemed incompatible. There's been a little bit of a movement against charter school board members charter school leaders, like the executive director, who are also county board members, county board of education members. There's been a little bit of movement against them. I think that's kind of still in a holding pattern. I don't think it's been, reconciled just yet. And then our last slide here is about nepotism. I gave you some memes before, but just a little background here. The word nepotism comes from the Italian word for nephew, and it can be traced all the way back to the late 15th century. Nepotism defined is the appearance of or the actual favoritism in employment, hiring, compensation, supervising, or discipline, appointments, contracting, or decision-making based on family or personal relationships. You can't hire someone because they're your cousin. Best practice to avoid this would be to implement and enforce an anti-nepotism policy that defines the scope of nepotism and the procedures to avoid it. So if you don't have an anti-nepotism policy, we can send one over. And that, believe it or not, takes us to the end. Oh my God, yeah, we really did it. Thank you all for listening. I hope you were listening. Thanks for, I was out of the country for a couple of weeks and I came back and got very sick. And so I'm really glad my voice held out.
You
the whole-
did great, Janelle. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Of course.
And great job, team.
Yep. I'm happy to release you to the rest of your day. We'll, Nicole, we'll follow up with certificate.
Excellent. For some documentation. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Great. All right. With that, board, I am pleased to turn it back to Chairman Bullock for a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Ms. Duquette. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Can I second it?
I think
Or
your
do I
motion
have to
was
move
good,
it?
Kat.
Okay, I move to adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Bullock, would you like to second?
I'll second that. It's been moved and properly second. All those in favor say aye. Do we have to, go roll call on
yeah.
this?
No.
I don't think,
Heard. Thank
I
you.
don't think a motion to adjourn is debatable. So we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
everybody.
Have a great day,
And
everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. We
Bye-bye.
can close the feed.